Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 549 for the 5th of Sivan in a regular year. So hopefully most of you know by now that when we think about values and values that we want to try to emulate, Hollywood is probably not the right place to look, right? So while yes, it's true that we can really learn something from every place, the Baal Shem Tov taught us that there's a lesson that can be learned from everything that we see. Sometimes the lesson is exactly how not to be, what not to do. And I think that this is very much true in a lot of Hollywood kind of movies, which especially speaking of like more romantic kind of movies. And I think that these values have seeped into the greater world at large, probably more so in the world of Hollywood itself, like amongst actors and celebrities and stuff like that, but I think into the greater world at large. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about this idea of romance and the understanding of what love is. So there's kind of like the notion in the world of Hollywood of falling in love. So if you think about that word, falling, that term, falling in love, falling, it's like, how do we usually fall? We usually fall, let's say if we trip over something, God forbid, fall down the stairs, things like that. Like it's kind of like something happens to a person and that causes them to fall. So there's kind of like this understanding that love is this almost passive experience that happens to a person, that they're just like walking down the street one day and they trip and fall and oh no, here they are. Now they're in love. Right. And while this might sound really romantic at first glance, like this idea of love at first sight, they just knew, they just saw each other, it was so beautiful and all of that, it actually can be a very dangerous value to hold, because it can actually ultimately lead to is, God forbid, adultery. Because if it's so easy to fall into love, it's just as easy to fall out of love, seemingly, right? And if this idea of falling in love is really put as being like the highest of the high, like value that we want to attain and that we really look towards, and that this is like the be all end all, then who's to say that if, let's say somebody's married and they're having somewhat of a functional marriage or whatever, but then they meet someone else and then they fall in love with someone else, who's to say that they shouldn't leave their current spouse and go with this new person that they fall in love with, right? Because if love is really this be all end all, and falling in love is how a person really attains this state of love, why not just follow the love? You love this person one day, this person the other day. There's like movements nowadays towards polyamory, this idea that you can love multiple people, and why not? And love is everything, love is everywhere. Just love, all of that. And we can't control who we love, and we should just kind of go with it. Whatever our instincts are telling us, whichever the way the wind flows, and whoever it is that we're drawn towards the most, that's who we should go with. That's who we should love. And this is, as you can imagine, not at all in line with Torah values, not at all in line with Judaism at all. And while there is an idea in Judaism of hamshachas halev, of just kind of like, it literally means the drawing of the heart. And the Rebbe actually spoke about this quite a lot, that in the dating process, it shouldn't just be this like intellectual endeavor. There needs to be a natural pull towards the other person that is kind of just innate, that you feel towards the other person, and hopefully that's the type of person that you're going to end up marrying. At the same time, that feeling is not the whole story either. And we're not just slaves to these feelings. We actually have a lot more control over our feelings and over who we fall in love with and over who we don't fall in love with than we might think at first glance. So where this discussion brings us to is because we know that every relationship that we have in our world, relationships between humans, is really a metaphor for our relationship with God. This really brings us to our relationship with God. And we know that we began speaking about this yesterday, this idea of this commandment to love God, this commandment to fear God. This is actually a huge theme of the Tanya. If you've been following along, we've brought this up a lot. And yesterday we began a new section of the Tanya. We began the section known as Chinuch Katan, which is the introduction to Shar HaYichud VeHa'emunah, the section of the Tanya, which deals with a lot of ideas about God and the world and the purpose of the world and all of that kind of stuff. But that section of the Tanya begins with this introduction of Chinuch Katan, which is all about the education of the child in his youth and how that education should really stay with us throughout all of our lives. And what is this education that we began talking about yesterday is creating this baseline understanding of loving and fearing in God and instilling a sense of love and fear of God into a child. And we talked about how there are different levels of love and fear of God. There's a lower level of love and fear of God, which is something that is applicable to everybody and something that we should all work towards. And then there's a higher level of love and fear of God, which is really only applicable to tzaddikim. And that's a level of love and fear of God that actually not all of us can attain. And even for tzaddikim, it comes to them as a reward. It's not really something that they can there's a specific thing that they can do to generate it. But so today we're going to talk about this idea of generating this first lower level of love and fear of God and what that means exactly, and how Moshe Rabeinu actually was the original teacher who taught us and who instilled within us this sense of loving and fearing God and cultivating this loving and fearing God, and what that means exactly. What does it mean to cultivate a sense of love and fear of God? How can you command somebody to love somebody? So, going back to the Hollywood examples and relationships and all of that stuff, it seems really strange and really like the antithesis of what we learn in Hollywood about people either love people or they don't. They fall in love with them or they don't fall in love with them. That's not accurate. And indeed, just like when it comes to a person, there's a lot that we can do to generate feelings of love towards that person, generate feelings of fear or respect towards the person. Some people, even in the secular world, do have an acknowledgement of this idea of there's a term like love is a verb, that the more loving you act towards somebody, the more you'll feel love towards them. So now the Tanya takes a little bit of a different angle with all of this. And the Tanya actually says that one way to generate love and fear of God is actually through the intellect, through contemplation and meditation upon that which we love, which we want to love, which in this case is God. And so that's what today's Tanya is really going to be focusing on, is what this means, how we can really generate feelings of love and fear of God, at least on that more baseline level of love and fear of God, through intellectual contemplation and meditation, and how this is the type of love that we're talking about when we say that this is the love that we should instill in every child, and that hopefully was instilled within us as children, or we can all consider ourselves to be children at any moment, and that should stay with us throughout our lives. So with that being said, let's get into the text. And for context again, we're in the middle of Chinuch Katan, which is this introduction to Shar HaYichud VeHa'emunah. So here we go. And so just continuing from last time. So last time we began speaking about these two different levels of love, that there's the level of love that tzaddikim have, which is something that's not something that all of us can attain, and it comes to them as a gift. And then there's a different type of love that is more relevant to all of us, which is a type of love that is intellectually generated through our intellectual contemplation and meditation. And so now the Alter Rebbe begins today, and he says that this type of love that we've been discussing, this type of love that comes about through our own meditation and contemplation, is something that Moshe Rabeinu wanted to implant in the hearts of every single Jewish person. And we see this where he says, this is taken from Devarim, where he says, V'ata Yisrael v'gomer. So the rest of that pasuk is, V'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha Osheinu Mimcha. This is taken from Devarim chapter 10, verse 12, where it says, what does God ask of you guys? To love and fear him. And we had spoken about this at length. Is it any small thing to love and fear God? It's a big deal, but this is really the type of love that Moshe Rabeinu was asking of the Jewish people to have is this type of love that is based on, that comes about through meditation and contemplation upon God. And then there's a few other psukim also that allude to this. So there's Hen la Hashem Elokecha hashamayim v'gomer. So this is talking about God's greatness. So this is also from Devarim. And then there's a few other verses too that the Alter Rebbe cites that are also from Devarim that talk about how God only wanted our forefathers and he circumcised them and he took us into Egypt, the 70 souls into Egypt. And so all of this, so talking about all of God's relationship with us and how God specifically chose us and God specifically descended into Egypt for us. And so then the conclusion of all of this is that v'ahavta b'gomer, that you should love God. So thus we see that Moshe Rabeinu was teaching the Jewish people how to love God through this meditation, through this type of understanding that of really trying to recognize who God is and what God did for us, and hopefully having this lead to this arousal of love within us. And so this is why now we can understand why it is that that Moshe Rabeinu concluded this whole section of love saying, Asher anochi metzaveh etchem la'asotah, that which I commanded you to do. So I commanded you to love God. So this is, again, a very practical type of love that comes about in the heart through bina, through understanding and das and knowledge about those things which arouse feelings of love towards God. And we see that Hashem actually gave this commandment through Moshe Rabeinu previously in the Shema prayer, where it says, "V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha," that these words which I command you to this day shall be upon your heart. So again, there's this connection between the heart loving and a commandment, which now we can understand, because through this contemplation and meditation, this can lead to loving God, as is explained in Sifrei. So Sifrei talks about this verse, and the commentary Sifrei talks about this and talks about this connection between how to bring about love through action. And so thus now we can understand how this second type of love, this love that applies to every person, we can attribute the lashon, the language of a mitzvah and a commandment to, because this is something that we can't necessarily tell somebody to love somebody, like feel this feeling in their heart, like in this automatic way. Every person has the ability to focus their heart and mind upon things that will arouse love. So it's like we may not have the choice to change how we feel in the moment, but we do have the choice as to what to focus on. So this is a common thing that comes up even in modern day psychology. People talk about how love is a verb, and that if you act loving towards your partner, this will arouse feelings of love in you. So there are really practical things we can do. Like we can focus on the good in our partner, we can focus on the bad in our partner. And depending on what we focus on, this will change our feelings. So in this case, and when we really focus on God in the proper way, this can actually arouse feelings of love. However, the Alter Rebbe goes back and he says, but the first type of love that we talked about initially, this type of love that's like a flame that arises of its own accord, we can't say that this is a mitzvah or that this is a commandment, because it's something which just it's given as a reward to tzaddikim so that they will have a taste of the world to come. And this is alluded to in a verse in Bamidbar, chapter 18, verse 7, where it says, Avodat matana etenet kunatchem, that I shall grant you a priestly service as a gift. So as will be explained further at length, says the Alter Rebbe. So basically this is, again, it's talking about the idea that this first type of love that we talked about is not something which can be commanded, because it's something which just which comes about as a reward for a person refining themselves and working on themselves and working on their connection with God to such a high extent. So that's the end of this section for today, and tomorrow we will conclude this section of Chinuch Katan. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.